in Dover Foxcroft at this really nice library. I spend the summers up in Greenville, and our library is considerably smaller, and I mean a lot smaller. But so I also coincidentally, for those us Navy guys, John happens to have an exhibit about the oceans out here right now. So what a pleasant coincidence. My name is Ed Linz, L-I-N-Z. I was born in Kentucky. I would probably have continued to be a dirt farmer in Kentucky on the Ohio River, but I somewhat accidentally ended up at the Naval Academy. I had never seen a ship, and really, I had seen 2 episodes of this series called Men of Annapolis, but I saw an 8mm video of one of my mom, who was a nurse, her buddies. They lived in a 3-room house. But they had a son at the Naval Academy, and I think he was out of 59. Anyway, his name was Lowe, L-O-W-E. And I said to myself, ticket out of Kentucky. So I wrote to my congressman and asked if I could go, and without telling my parents. And when the letter came telling me that I could take the test, they said, what the hell is this? And I said, well, I applied to go to the academy. Anyway, when I went to take the test, there were about 25 of us going to all the different academies, and people said, which one do you want to go to? All these other boys. And I said, I want to go to Naval Academy. And they all laughed at me. They said, I said, why are you laughing? They said, you see that big guy over there? That's the fullback on the Highlands High School football team. They were the state champions. They said, he's going to Naval Academy. And I said, well, I only saw one video. So anyway, that's how I ended up there, and then I ended up going to submarines for 20 years, etc. The background for this book about the Great Depression, it was guilt. And that is, like a lot of younger people, I made the mistake of not talking to my parents and learning about them. You're young, you're totally self-absorbed. And so consequently, I didn't talk to them much. My dad died in 1970. He had smoked 3 packs of Luckies a day and died of emphysema. But my mom, I was planning to talk a lot more to. She had been a nurse, and nursing school, as they called it, nursing training during the early 30s. And but she was killed in an auto accident. So meanwhile, that exact year, I was diagnosed with this terrible rare disease called cardiac sarcoidosis. I had no symptoms, and when the doctor, the cardiologist, what he called my wife's a nurse too, called her in, both of us, and he said, you have cardiac sarcoidosis. We don't know what causes it. There's no known cure, and it's fatal. And he gave me 2 years to live. I had no symptoms. So anyway, I did start to develop, which is an arrhythmia of the heart, and it's an electrical problem in your heart. And by 1994, I was teaching high school physics at the time. I couldn't walk from here up to John's desk up there at all without gasping for breath. So I was hospitalized, assuming I was going to die. But I received a 9/9/94, a life-saving heart transplant operation. And if you have any questions about that afterwards, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. So I'm a big supporter of organ and tissue donation. When I got out, I couldn't go back to teaching because I was immunosuppressed. And as we know, classrooms are virus factories. So I decided I'd make up for my sins and learn about my parents' era. So I went around the country talking to as many people as I could who had lived during the Great Depression. Some of these interviews were by folks where they would say, you got to see so-and-so, you got to talk to so-and-so. He's in Nebraska, but you got to go out. So anyway, I had nothing else to do, and so I went and traveled around. And several of the interviews came through serendipity, you might say, and I'd be walking along the street and say, excuse me, sir, how old are you? Or even ask women, which is high risk. They tell me, and next thing I'm up in their apartment, my tape recorder recording. One of the stories I'll talk to you about here is about the one-legged black guy I met down in Key West, Florida. We're pretty interested in that. Anyway, I saved all those tapes. I went back teaching. It was very busy in '99, but in 2011 I wanted to retire to write this novel. So I did. I wrote this novel over here. This is not for kids. It's hurtling to the edge, but it's a thriller involving physics, religion, drugs, and sex. what I call your 4 basic food groups. Anyway, it took me a long time to write that. It's pretty thick. And so I had all these tapes from the interviews from the Great Depression sitting on little cassette tapes. So I brought them up here to Greenville at our camp, and they worked. Couldn't believe it. And had all my notes still. So I sat down and 2 years ago and listened to all the tapes again, did a lot more research, and wrote the book. I am not a professional historian, but I know a lot about the Great Depression because I spent basically 2 years of my life researching it. And that's what I'd like to share with you tonight. Please interrupt me at any time. I'm going to interrupt you by asking questions periodically. First of all, I want to make sure you go away tonight with one thought and one thought alone. And that is, you want to be frightened about the alarming similarities between the 1920s and the 2020s. It's remarkably similar. And by that I mean 1918 through 1921 had the worldwide Spanish flu pandemic. Obviously, pandemic sounds familiar. Also, many of the people that I interviewed had what we now call long COVID. But during the 20s, they had people dying from the Spanish flu because they developed pneumonia and other symptoms, but they didn't call it that. They just said, hey, they died. But a lot of people died from that lingering effect. I want to talk, and obviously we'll talk about the stock market, but you know, ours is going up and down crazy right now, just like it did then. And I want to talk a little bit about the political situation. Warren G. Harding, he ran on this return to normalcy, and I'm not going to read all these slides to you. I hope that you can read them if you can't and move up closer. But basically, one of the ladies I interviewed in Ohio, her father was a judge and very involved in Ohio politics. And he always told her that he was the reason that Warren G. Harding became president, because he was really pushing him. It was all in a smoke-filled room sort of convention up in Chicago. And does anyone know who the vice presidential person was for the Democrats that he ran? Yes, ma'am.
FDR.
It was. Most people don't understand. Roosevelt got beat very soundly, as a matter of fact, in the 1920 election as the vice presidential candidate. Okay, here's one for you. If you know the answer, wait till everyone else says they don't know. Okay? And that is, what was Warren G. Harding's middle name?
Gamaliel.
There you go. Gamaliel. Gamaliel. This is an incredible crowd. Yeah. And don't tell me he was a personal friend, okay?
No.
Anyway, he won in a landslide. Wilson's and the Democrats have become very unpopular. And so he said, hey, let's get back to normal, was his return to normal. As a matter of fact, the whole time he was president, he was very popular. Unemployment came down tremendously. Things were looking pretty good. He traveled around the country and went to Alaska, but he got sick and came back to Seattle. By the time he got down to San Francisco, he died down there. He sort of set a bar for future presidents. And by that I mean in terms of extramarital sex. Okay? Very interesting. You know, we talk about things that Clinton did in the White House. Harding was there first. Okay? He had had several different affairs, including having sex in a coat closet in the White House. One of the ladies said it was named Nan Britton anyway. Anyway, he was very popular. But when he died, suddenly due to that heart attack, not long after that, information came out about this Teapot Dome scandal that you may have heard about. And that sort of stained his presidency in the sense that that's what most people remember about Warren G. Harding, was the Teapot Dome scandal, some land issues out in, I think, Colorado. But his vice president, Coolidge, it didn't seem to hurt him because he was elected by pretty wide margins also. He had the nickname Silent Cow, which is sort of ironic because by the time he decided to, 1928 came around, he finished out Harding's term, then he got reelected. And he could have run again, but he decided he didn't want to. And, but I say it's ironic that he was called Silent Cow because, let me look at my notes, he held, are you listening, Mr. President, now? 520 press conferences. Okay. So in other words, although he had that nickname, he really communicated quite a lot with the people at that time, and was popular. He was popular. He was succeeded. He also was interesting. He was the first president. People think of Roosevelt doing the fireside chats. This guy here, Coolidge, was one of the first ones to use radio. And so he talked to the country on radio quite a bit. He was succeeded by Hoover. Hoover is really an interesting character in that he, I don't have my cards here for that. He was, does anyone know where Hoover was born? Anyone know where he was born? Well, sometimes when I'm talking to different groups, they'll say, oh yeah, it was in Oregon. No, he was raised in Oregon by a rich uncle. He was actually an orphan.
Yeah,
His
so
mother
I read
died.
that just recently.
Yeah, his mother died. And anyway, he moved, got picked up by his literally rich uncle. And so he, up in Oregon, lived in Oregon, but he went to Stanford. He got into Stanford in a strange circumstance. I suspect money from the uncle, because he flunked all except one of the entrance exams. But he was in Stanford. And while he was there, he became a very good student. Let me make sure I have this thing on sound. He was a very good student, really took to engineering. And he, when he graduated, already had a job up in the mining area up in Northern California, primarily looking for gold. He pretty soon after that ended up down in Australia. And he was a wonderful engineer and even a better manager, and developed a reputation in Australia that if you got a problem with a mine, you got a hold of Herbert Hoover. So he ended up even during the Boxer Rebellion in China, and about 1908, he ended up very wealthy in an office in London, and was as a mining consultant for mines all over the world. When World War I broke out, even though he was a Republican, he volunteered with Woodrow Wilson, to be the food czar. And he created things like Meatless Monday, Wheatless Wednesday. He liked alliteration. But that's where his name got around. So everyone knew who Herbert Hoover was. And he actually was thinking about running in 1920, but that convention went through all of these different iterations with no one could get support until Harding died. So he immediately joined the cabinet of Harding, and he became by far the most powerful member of the cabinet. As a matter of fact, he was called the secretary of everybody else's department. And so he was very, very well known. And so when Coolidge decided not to run, boom, he got the nomination and was very, very popular. And once again, won by quite a bit. Then stuff happened. But I want to first of all, before I talk about what happened, I want to talk a little bit about Roosevelt. As I said, he was James Cox's vice presidential candidate in 1920. People always remember him being paralyzed by polio, but that did not happen. Did not happen until 1921. The lady he married, Eleanor, was his fifth cousin, if you can go back that far. I don't know. They all had money. Has anyone here been over to Campo Bello? you know, Campobello, yeah, to those, quote, cottages over there.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I went over there as a physics teacher on the kid with my family because I wanted to see the lightning rods on top of those cottages, the huge mansions. And so I then had them, so if we have time at the end, I'll share what you don't know about lightning rods. And then explain that to you. They are not to attract lightning. So I will explain it to
No,
you.
they're
Little bonus topic. At any rate, he had a lot of money. He had a lot of money. And he was a career politician. That's what he did. New York State Senate, ended up being New York governor. He was New York governor before he became president. As you can see, he killed Hoover with large electoral thing. He was really popular in 36 after he'd been in there for a while. That's a real wipeout. Notice that each one of these Republicans, there was also a slew of other third-party candidates. A lot of third-party candidates. The Socialist Party, Communist Party, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. None of them got, I think, any electoral votes. But there was, if you went to the ballot then, there was a lot of people on it. Much more than you have now. So anyway, even when 44 came up, you can see his popularity declined, but he still won really landslide there on the Electoral College. I want to talk about some of the misconceptions. Everyone thinks that the 20s were roaring. They weren't so roaring. Particularly if you were a farmer. Farmers really had big problems during the 20s.
Still do.
Yeah, I grew up on a farm.
Still do.
It's a tough life. It's a tough life. But the first bullet there tells you pretty much what you want to hear. On average, 600 banks failed every year. Now, you say, how could that be? Well, that's because they're all mom and pop banks. You didn't have Bank of America. You didn't have all the Wells Fargo, whatever bank you want to talk about now. They're all local banks. And the word would go out, hey, they're running out of money down at the bank. Everybody run in, try to draw their money out, and the bank fold and close.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's not as dramatic a point as you might think. But that's still a large number. Still a large number. You can also see that energy and mining, et cetera. But you talk about income inequality. 200 corporations controlled half of the U.S. They're robber baron guys on the railroads, on the steels, mills, and all that stuff at that time. So, I mean, there was tremendous inequality at that time. A few other things here. There were significant signs that things were not going to turn out well. Significant signs. You can see automobile sales fell by a third. Well, that's a lot during the first half of 29 there. Actually, the peak of the market was in early September. No one knew then that that peak was going to be a problem to benchmark. When are we going to get back there? It did not get back to that level for 25 years until the early 1950s. So if you're holding some stuff in your IRA now, you might have to see if you got 25 more years left to cash in on it. Okay. Toyota was trying to scare you a little bit. Okay. But when it started to decline, and then it accelerated, and then all of a sudden, boom, you had those famous days, Black Thursday, Black Monday, Black Tuesday. And that's when you have the pictures of the stockbrokers jumping off roofs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But my point is, the seeds had been sown during the 20s. And it all just culminated at the end of the 20s. And that's when things got bad. So I have this little slide. I don't like to say the Depression began in 1929. I think it began earlier, maybe not in terms of finance, but the conditions were all established. The conditions were established. And then, boom, it went down. The end is easier to talk about because as Europe went to war, we went to building war stuff. And that then sucked up a lot of jobs. People that have been trouble getting, my dad, for example, who he had only gone to the 3rd grade. And he was essentially a laborer, worked in a foundry. But he got a job over at one of the aircraft plants outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. So not when the war began, but back in the late 30s. So that's why it's hard to say. Also, it was not one of these deals where, boom, the stock market crashed. Things are terrible. FDR comes in. Nice steady climb all the way up to the end of the beginning of the world. Not how it happened. There was a very serious, you might also say, second depression, recession, whatever word you want to use, between 37 and 38. And if the war hadn't come along, who knows what would happen. But it was not this steady, nice climb to prosperity. Just look at this. Interesting. Average incomes went down. The price of new cars went up. Part of that was that they started building more luxury cars for the rich people that still had money. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But average guys couldn't buy the cars, so they switched to building more expensive cars because the guys that had money could then show off. You didn't have to drive a Model T. Okay? You could have a really nice, but they were more expensive. As you can see, housing prices really plummeted. Bread, milk, and gas stayed about the same. Everybody that I talked to vividly remembered exactly how much they paid for gas, as we're doing now. But I mean, people know when you go to that pump, you remember how much you paid for that gas. But they all told me that. And you can see the Dow Jones average here. I want to talk a little bit about these programs. Many of you have heard of these. I was surprised when up in Greenville, we have a road up there called the Ccc Road. No one I talked to knows what the hell that's about. I mean, unless you're a large generation, you might say, sort of thing. But the Civil Conservation Corps. This was very popular. Everyone that I talked to that was involved in it, it was popular with them. But people don't understand how it really worked. You got paid $30 a month, which is great. You never saw it. You saw one $5 bill. The other 25 was sent to your parents. So your parents liked it. Particularly if you get a couple kids into the CCC. But several of the people that I talked to that interviewed in the book worked in the CCC. They liked it. It gave them a skill set, and they enjoyed the camaraderie of it. It was run pretty much by Army officers, but you didn't get shot. So pretty good bonus there on that. FHA only lasted 2 years at that time because it was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and this is what really pissed off FDR. Actually, he wanted to stack the court, unsuccessfully, I might add. But but it only lasted a couple years. TVA is still there, still making electricity throughout the South and Midwest. TVA, WPA, more controversial. Some of the people I talked to that worked in the WPA really liked it. It was a much broader program. CCC was only for young men. WPA was for everyone. You could be an artist, you could be a musician, you could be a stonemason, all different things, and you could work on it. But the reason I say it was controversial, some of the people I talked to said, and I'm going to quote, those lazy bastards leaning on their shovels. Okay, when they talk about guys having a gun and stuff like that. Other people loved it. Say, hey, I love it, got to school. I went straight then from working on the roads, I went to working for the state, and I retired, 35 years later. So it did provide a lot of jobs for a lot of different people. Has anyone ever heard of a group called the Book Women? The Book Women. You heard of them?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, tell me about it.
We're going to have a program here.
Yeah, we're doing the book. Our book club is reading that book
Really?
this month.
There's a couple books about it, but these were ladies. primarily in Appalachia, who would deliver books out. I don't know if I have a slide in this presentation or not. There's a nice picture of it. Shows a lady on horseback handing a book to a family there in Appalachia that they would ride around on the circuit and give them books. And some of them even read to the people because they couldn't read. Very fascinating aspect of the whole thing. But at any rate, they were employed by the WPA. So there are a lot of different jobs that occurred during that. Social Security, I'm knocking on wood, it'll still be there for me tomorrow. Okay? It began then and is still rolling along now. I want to talk a little bit about this photograph. It's on the cover of the book. And the reason I chose it is because of this girl's eyes. They look almost like they're staring into your soul. This was a family, and I'll pass this book around. I found this in a used bookstore. And it actually has this photograph, plus several others of the same family. He was down there with the writer James Agee. They're working for like the Farm Bureau Administration or something like that, which is a federal program. He also was a stringer for Fortune magazine. And they spent 3 months living with 3 different sharecropper families, all in Hale County, Alabama. As you can tell, extremely poor. I actually had to Photoshop the picture for the cover of my, that's not the real picture. I had to Photoshop it because the little boy in the middle, his nightshirt was not covering his privates. And I didn't want that hanging out on the front of my book. But anyway, that's the only thing I changed on the thing. But if you look at it close, you'll see the little girl's legs and the mother's legs. The only one wearing shoes is the grandmother. She's wearing clodhoppers, sort of thing. In the front of the book, I have a whole section which tells you everything you didn't want to know about the cover and the background of it. The guy that took this picture, Walker Evans, became very famous. He and Agee, they couldn't sell their story to the magazine. So like me, they kept their manuscript. And in 1941, they had a bestseller. I don't know if anyone has ever read that or not. Let Us Now Praise Famous Room. I don't think it's particularly well written myself, but it did tell people a lot about what was going on and some of the hardships that these families had. And like I said, I'll pass this around. You take a look at through it. There's all sorts of pictures from that particular area. Yes, sir.
They ought to have something like that in the schools right now.
Well,
But a lot of them now in these schools today can't read very well and understand what they read.
you don't need to talk to me about schools since I
know.
spent 25 years there,
Right,
okay?
but-
And I would probably, I stopped teaching in
shame.
public schools in 2011. I still, when I go back to Virginia during the winter, I teach a group of homeschoolers physics. And I had 9 students last year that were great. But I'm politically incorrect, and I would probably last maybe a half a day now until someone says that. You know what Mr. Linz said? I mean,
Yeah, right.
at any rate.
They
But
need you out.
I was very straightforward to him. Like I would say to the students,
You need
I said a couple things. I'd say, I tell you right up front, I have favorites. The difference is each one of you can be my favorite. The
right.
competition begins right now.
That's right.
That sort of thing. And I'd say, there's no such thing as that phrase, there's no such thing as a dumb question. I said, I spent my life listening to dumb questions, okay? But we're going to work our way through it. So, I mean, like I said, I wouldn't last very long right now. Anyway, I got everyone's name. I found everyone's name, ironically, except the little girl that I was most fascinated with. This picture's in the National Archives. So anyway, it was a difficult time then. I want to talk about some of the people that I had the pleasure of interviewing. And I mean pleasure. I really enjoyed it. I met this lady, Vortame Honold, and that's really not her name.
Thank you.
She didn't know it until many years later when she, and I'll talk about that in a minute, went to work for the government, had to look up her birth certificate, found her name was not Vorda. It was Vodra, Vadra. And her father didn't like it. And so he always called her Vorda. And that's what she assumed her name was. So I met her. You'll notice there's a lot of Chinese thing. This is the lady I talked to earlier about that spent some time over in Shanghai. But her whole apartment's decorated like in Chinese motif. I met her at a meeting for the George Washington University Hospital Women's Club. I was given a speech, invited to give a speech about organ and tissue donation. And they then invited me back. And I got to know Vorda. And as a matter of fact, I am now, I'm proud to say, the only male member of the George Washington University Hospital Women's Club. And that's because I have a woman's heart, literally. My donor was a 33-year-old woman at the time. So anyway, she invited me over to her apartment, and what a character. A little racy, you might say, when you talk to her, and that sort of thing. But hey, when you get that old, like, you know, hey. Anyway, she was born out there in Nebraska, and her mother immediately went into very severe psychiatric postpartum and was shipped off to a hospital. And she only saw her mother 3 times before she was 21. Her father was a postman, and he would hire nurses to come in and take care of Vorda May. And she said they took care of me during the day, and they took care of my dad at night. So she ended up marrying early. She said, this guy was so handsome. I just fell for him immediately, and she had a child with him. She said, but every other woman in town thought he was handsome too, and so he reciprocated with them. So she ended up getting divorced at a fairly early age and had this child. She told me about large number of people that died in this small community out there from Spanish flu. And when the Depression hit, her father, because he had a job, and I'll talk about that later, he had a job as a postman. He had 2 horses. He delivered the mail on 2 horses. So he had a job. He had some money. So when people were losing their farms and stuff, they would sell stuff at really low rates to her dad. And her dad ended up with this incredible collection of firearms, dating back not just to the Civil War, but to the Revolutionary War. And had all these firearms that they're now in a museum in, I think, Hastings, Nebraska. But very interesting character. So she actually came from money on her grandfather's side. He had gone to Virginia Military Institute and served as an officer for the Union in the Civil War. Following the war, he went out to Wyoming and became a very wealthy cattle rancher. And he befriended many of the Chinese people who were working on the Transcontinental Railroad. And when everyone else was shunning them, so he would talk to Vorda when she was growing up about these people, and that's where she developed this fascination with China. So she went off to Washington, D.C. because an uncle was able to get her a job back there as a GS1, lowest level, back in 1938. She rose up through the ranks and ended up, when the war was going, had like 50 people working for her. But here's a question for you. She worked with a lot of people who referred to as $1-a-year men.
Yeah.
Who knows what a $1-a-year man is? You know, what is it?
It was
Diplomat.
it was not real money, but they were, I don't know, paid in other ways.
They volunteered their services
Right.
as a diplomat.
Well, they would work not only for diplomats, but in various other parts of the government, wealthy people. At the time, you could not volunteer your services. This is during the war. You could not volunteer your services. You had to be paid, so they took $1 a year.
Yeah.
And that's where the phrase $1-a-year man comes from. So she met a lot of really powerful guys, particularly since she was working with the State Department. And then she started working with the OSS, which is the precursor for the CIA. And then when it became the CIA, that's how she got sent to China. And so she spent 2 fascinating years over there and actually gave me about a 35-page memoir that she wrote while she was over there. I was telling people ahead of time she hated Chiang Kai-shek. But her apartment, whole apartment was decorated like that. Just a very pretty woman too, I think. Very, very pretty. Very, very, really liked her for it all.
That's quite a collection in that book of pictures.
Oh, it is.
Beautiful.
They're beautiful.
And,
I say, I think that book's out of print. I don't think you can get it.
You collected all those pictures?
No, those are,
That was in a book?
those pictures are all in that book that I got at a used bookstore.
Oh, okay.
That's how I
didn't
got
get
it. But that book, I think, is out of print.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little about the guy in the middle, John Torin. It wasn't his real name. His real name he was Polish. Like a lot of people, they changed their names. Twarzianski. His father came through Ellis Island. They started up became a butcher. It wasn't in Jersey. It wasn't doing well, so they moved over to what he called a free farm in Long Island.
Boy, that was good.
Does anyone
farm
know what a
country.
free farm is? I got a lot of questions. Free farm. This is where they give you 50 acres on Long Island to farm, but it was like almost like the sharecroppers, and that you had to give half of what you got made back to the guy that really owned the land. There was a lot of wealth out there, obviously, on Long Island.
Yeah.
The guy I want to talk about that was insanely rich was Otto Khan, K-A-H-N. At the time, he was the third wealthiest guy in the country. He had his own big estate out there. John worked for him as on the golf course, picking weeds out of the greens. He also had, at that time, this guy had a landing strip on his property on Long Island. You can picture how much that's worth today. But on there, they raised some cows, and so John would deliver the milk in a Model T. But he went into New York and got a job working on Wall Street as a runner. It was all, no digital, of course, run slips between various brokerage houses. He did that, and that's where he became fascinated with boxing. He wanted to join the Golden Gloves. Has anyone ever heard of the Golden Gloves? Yeah. It's amateur boxing. It was big even when I was a kid. As a matter of fact, Cassius Clay, aka Muhammad Ali,
Yes.
started out as a Golden Gloves boxer. My dad had a beer store out in the country, and when he moved out there, he got tired of farming. He said, "You're the farmer." And so he opened up a beer store to sell beer to the hillbillies. And so we had a lot of time to talk. And guys would come in, and a lot of these were what we called at the time punch-drunk boxers. Just like Muhammad Ali became, he was punch-drunk, okay? They can say it was Parkinson's, say whatever they want,
Yeah.
but he was punch-drunk. You get hit in the head too often.
Right.
And anyway, it was all funny. These were all not top-tier boxers that would come in. But they would always say, "I went 4 rounds with so-and-so." That was their claim to
Claim to
fame
fame.
before they got
Yep.
knocked out. I went 4 rounds. Anyway, John saw a lot of professional fights in Madison Square Garden. And he also went to a lot of Yankees games and Giants games there. I don't know if he went to any Dodgers games in Brooklyn. But they bought these instruments. That's his brother on the right. And I'll show you the next picture, you won't believe. But that's his brother on the right.
He's in the middle.
He's in the middle, the short guy in the middle. His brother, as a younger brother, was actually the leader of this band. But they bought these instruments on time over in Times Square. Since he was over there in New York, they bought these instruments where you'd pay like $1 every 2 weeks.
What you gotta do?
And anyway, they formed a big band. These were 21, he was 20, his brother was like 18.
Yep.
And they formed this band, and they played the speakeasies on Long Island. And they would hire the singers. They would hire a vaudeville comedian and put on this show. And they're all the other guys are older. But these are the guys running the band. And really very interesting things. They first started, their first gig was in 1933. So who can tell me now, when did Prohibition end?
36.
Nope.
38?
It was 33. It was December
33? Yeah.
December 5th in 33. He was very excited to tell me about this because they were playing. And when the word came out that prohibition had ended, everyone, he said, got incredibly drunk. And he said, fights broke out. He said, and this is his exact words, he said, so we just kept playing louder. But
Couldn't handle it.
their band was together. He was pumping gas during the day and playing these gigs at night and living there. The band would have probably went on, but they all ended up going off to war. And so that's when the band broke up. And he ended up, after the war, working for the VA, and worked for the VA many years and retired. Really a nice guy, though. The one I want to talk about is the little girl with her hand on her chin. That's Diana Pippenos. Very Greek. I met her in San Diego walking along the street near where one of my buddies lived, and I said, how old are you, blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, I don't want to talk to you. I said, well, if you decide you do, I'm staying at my buddy's house over here. A couple days later, knock, knock, knock. Diana there says, I want to talk. So, whatever. Her father came through Ellis Island, Greek. Had a restaurant in New York. They moved to L.A. Had a restaurant, Greek restaurants, right? Big restaurant in L.A. But when she was 9 years old, she got tuberculosis. And was put into a Catholic sanitarium. And she had, to put it charitably, very bad views about the nuns in the sanitarium. Because she said we'd have bugs in our soup and they'd say, push them aside. And she said there was this one nun, I forget her name, that would scream at these little girls saying, don't touch me, I'm holy.
Oh,
If you can imagine that for these little girls.
no.
Fortunately, she got better. I contend from a later interview I did, I contend that she may have gotten tuberculosis from drinking raw milk. I did not know you could get tuberculosis from that, but one of the guys I talked to lived on a farm and told me all about milk. Each one of these people wanted to tell me about everything they did. So, at any rate, this was run by Mother Cabrini. Has anyone ever heard of Mother Cabrini?
Mother McCree.
No, Mother Cabrini. She, very famous. As a matter of fact, in Colorado, they do not celebrate Veterans Day. They celebrate Mother Cabrini Day in Colorado. Because she was an Italian. The Pope said, I want you to go to America and start some orphanages and hospitals. Young girl. Came back, came over on a boat into New York, got money together and started a hospital. Started a bunch of other young girls being the nuns, working in them. Then she moved across the country, ended up even starting this TB sanitarium in Los Angeles. Very interesting person. The next one I want to talk about that Diana told me about was a lady named Sister Amy McPherson. Amy McPherson. Have you ever heard of her? She was a celebrity before there were celebrities. Big time. She would have parades at least once a month when every politician worth his salt would be in that parade in Los Angeles. And they would go to this huge Angelus temple that she had built. She was a TV evangelist before there was TV and had these huge, huge crowds. And what a character. She would ride in sometimes into her temple on a motorcycle. Get off, boom, 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 park it, and give a fire and brimstone sermon. Like a lot of people that get involved in this, she ended up getting caught up in some scandals and stuff like that. But if you ever want to read about it, it's A-I-M-E-E, Amy McPherson. What a character. Okay, I don't know if there's any books about it, but that'd be a great one to have a discussion about. Very interesting person. Diana actually it was the second person I talked to that ended up marrying a guy who took her up in a plane. She was walking her dog, a guy lands a plane next to her on the dirt strip and says, "Hey honey, wanna go for a ride?" She tied the dog up to the fence, jumped in the airplane, went off for a ride with us. Ended up marrying him. Turns out he was a cad also. And he was a Marine in World War II and apparently fathered a lot of children in a lot of places. And so she divorced him, and then she said, "I married a real Greek." And so she said, "That was a mistake. Should have married a Greek guy." And so they opened up their restaurants. As a matter of fact, she and her husband opened one of the biggest restaurants in San Diego, ultimately. But she met all sorts of movie stars. Oh, I want to show you, this is what happened. Check this out. Long Beach earthquake, 33. Her house got destroyed. They fortunately, had just ran out in the street when they started to feel in the rumbles.
Earthquake, yeah.
And they ran out in the street, their house collapsed. It could have been far, far, far worse because it occurred around 5:30 in the afternoon. Essentially every school building in the Long Beach area, like 80 of them, collapsed. And no one was in them because school had ended for the day. So also everyone I talked to had stories about natural disasters.
Yeah.
When I talked to people in Kentucky, it was the 37 flood. I'm sure if you talk to people 50 years from now, they'll talk about the floods in eastern Kentucky that occurred yesterday and still occurring today. But natural disasters are big. The
Same.
lady down in New Bedford, Mass. I talked to, it was the storm of 1938. I mean, that everyone remembers your own local disasters. And of course, the people out in the Dust Bowl.
Dust Bowl, that's right.
They remember that.
Tremendous.
The one lady told me, she said, during 1931, I don't think it rained during the whole year. So anyway, let me move on. This is a black guy. It didn't show well in the picture there. This is a guy I met in Key West, Florida, in the post office. And I say, "Excuse me, sir, how old are you?" Turn around, looks me up and down like this, with total disgust. And he says, "What the hell is it to you?" And I said, "Well, sir, I'm doing a book about the Great Depression." Meanwhile, everyone's looking at us now. I said, "I'm doing a book about the Great Depression. You look like you're alive in it." And in an equally loud voice, he says, "Damn straight I was alive, and it was the best time of my life." And I said, "I need to talk to you, sir." Time we got up, the clerk were best friends. Invites me over to his house just off of Duval Street in Key West, where all the chickens are. There you hear them when you go down there. He was living with a black lady. I'd estimate her age between 18 and 65, something like that. He couldn't. Anyway, she was a hooker, and but she took my brother-in-law out in town. He took her out to buy drinks. Didn't have sex as far as I know, but I didn't care because I was with JC talking to him. His real name was not JC, it was Zane, Z, but ended up with JC. Grew up sharecropper family, just like the picture in southern Georgia, except black and really poor. Not one day of school in his life. Said he went off into the woods. So what do you mean? Said, "Oh, I went to the turpentine forest in southern Georgia." And he had 7,300 trees that he was in charge of. And I did not understand where turpentine came from. He spent about an hour and a half giving me a tutorial on it. And I got a picture to show you. But basically, it's not like maple syrup that comes out of the sap.
Yeah.
You use this knife, it's a special blade that you score the bark with. And you score it in these, you can't see it real well here, this V shape here.
Run, so it'll
And the
run.
stuff comes, they got a little tin underneath here. Each one of the trees did that. And as the tree stopped oozing, they'd simply move up further until they got up so high they couldn't do it. And then they'd cut the tree down. But they would take this, pour it into 5-gallon buckets, then another black guy would come around on a horse-drawn wagon with big barrels in it. They dump the 5-gallon buckets in the big barrel, go back and distill it. The first thing that comes off when you heat it up is turpentine, just like you're making booze, moonshine, except it's turpentine. And it's interesting because there's a byproduct from this that's white, and it's not cocaine. A white powder. Anyone got to guess what this might be? And I'll give you a hint. In September, I'm going to go down and fulfill one of my dreams to watch a baseball game at Fenway Park. I will see it there. It's on the pictures now.
Resin.
Yeah, a rosin bag.
Rosin bag.
They call them rosin. Rosin.
Oh, okay.
It's a rosin bag. That's what the residue, one of the residues is from making this turpentine. Anyway, he told me he was really happy because he said, to me it sounded like slavery. And some white guy would ride through periodically and make sure they're doing it. He said, no, it wasn't. Said they paid us, they fed us, they housed us,
Yeah.
and didn't cheat us. Said every 2 years I got another car. Says I was the most popular black guy in town. He didn't use the word black guy in town. And so he ended up losing his leg at 81 years old when he was still working in a construction site. He was a character, real character. JC.
Tougher than a bag of hammers.
What's that?
Tougher than a bag of hammers.
Exactly. He was tough. This lady's a hero. I thought a lot of these people were heroes. This lady's a real hero. Country school teacher. One-room schoolhouse. There in Illinois. She's the one on the right. You'll never see her right arm, and I'll tell you why in a minute.
They did wonders.
That was one of her smaller classes at this thing. One year, different school, she had like 40 kids, teaching grades 1 through 8. She had an interesting episode there where there were 3 Hispanic kids in the class that had been working on the farms, and it was a first grader, 6th grader, and an 8th grader. The first grader was a boy, and she was teaching, throwing spitballs against the board. So she said to him, you have to stay in for recess and make you 1,000 spitballs. Well, the 6th grade boy said, Miss Roberts, he ain't staying in here, and he comes up and grabs her and puts a knife at her neck. And she said, the only reason I'm alive is because the 8th grade sister started screaming to the boy to put the knife down. But they would have to ride, she rode 6 miles sometimes on a horse, get there early, start the fire in the potbelly stove in the middle of the school, teach grades 1 through 8, and you better teach them because at the end of the year, the 8th graders got tested by the county, and if they didn't pass that test, it was you. And you were no longer making like $50 a month. But she was making, it was decent money that she was making then. And but she did this, she ultimately ended up marrying a high school teacher, and she ended up getting her to, these girls, I call them girls, they were 19, they never went to college. They'd finish high school and become a teacher. But she ultimately did go off and got a degree, and she ended up teaching in a high school. And she started a sewing club after school and taught a whole load of young girls how to sew, make their own clothes and everything during the Depression. But I really liked I took her arm. Who knows what organdy is? O-R-G-A-N.
Fabric.
Organdy. Organdy.
Fabric.
It is. What about it? What kind of fabric?
It's stiff and thin,
Exactly.
transparent. And,
Yep.
but his body.
Little girls used to wear it a lot.
Yeah.
They wear it. And she was at a picnic, and a coal from an ember hit her, or it's incredibly flammable, and hit her dress, caught on fire, and she was like 4 or 5 years old, started running and made it worse. Her mother tackled her and rolled her on the ground, but her arm had been, it was a long sleeve dress, it was severely burned. And they thought that they were going to have to amputate it. But some Indian woman that lived nearby had a special salve to put on it. She said, I'd scream and put on it, but I didn't lose my arm. But it was terribly disfigured, so she'd never let anyone see her right arm, sort of thing.
They were required to teach before they could go to school to be teachers.
Yeah, well, I did not know that, but that certainly was her case.
That
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
a couple of teachers in in Maine have told me the story of going out to one-room schoolhouses, my mother included, when they were in their late teens, in order to go to the Farmington Normal School.
Really?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
that's where they went, to normal.
Well, as I said,
Yeah.
I regard these people as incredible heroes.
There you
Because
go.
they would teach American values, they would teach all the subjects and everything else.
Right.
And they really made a lot of kids literate that were not literate at all.
That's right.
Had a chance to. So, pretty incredible group of people. This lady was rich. I tried to get a cross section of people from all over the country. Her father was a big executive with the B&O Railroad. As a matter of fact, he had his own railroad car. And so when they go on vacation, they get in the railroad car and go out to Indiana. Does anyone know John Stevens, who he is? Oh, you gotta read about him. He is the engineer that built the Panama Canal. He was a renowned engineer building railroads out in the Northwest. We got in trouble as a country trying to take over from the French building that Panama Canal. The French hadn't been able to do it for 20 or so years. We took over, oh, we can do it. No, we couldn't. It was floundering. So some guy told Roosevelt, you got to get a hold of Stevens. So he called Stevens back to D.C., Teddy Roosevelt, and sent Stevens down there. And he said, we're building a canal on. It's impossible to build this canal through these mountains. You have to use canals. And we're going to use this real large lake, Lake Gatun. And then we're going to build dams, and we're going to have locks and raise the ships up, and we'll raise them up. And that, if you go down there now, you never go through the Panama Canal. That's what they have now.
Yeah.
They got the original Panama Canal, and but there was also another guy with him, who was a physician that helped them beat malaria. But those two guys were the ones who essentially built the Panama Canal. So Stevens was an incredibly well-known guy and wealthy. He took his granddaughter, Virginia, down to Panama in 1930 on a steamship, and they stayed at the hotel that Stevens had built for Roosevelt to come down and inspect the canal. She said, once again, she was so saucy, and she'd say, honey, I could have had a date, breakfast, lunch, and dinner with all those handsome Army guys. And then she winks at me and says, I did. She came back, and a lot of long stories here, but anyway, she was a friend of Ginger Rogers, the singer and dancer. Rogers even loaned her a limo. And so it was, she had some catty remarks about Ginger Rogers, saying, isn't it a shame how she let herself go? I mean, that's you know.
That's a woman thing.
Yeah, anyway, I mean, but I tried to get a real cross-section of people. While I was up there in Indiana interviewing her, I interviewed a bunch of Mennonites up there, farmers. None of them, the ones I lost to did not lose their farm. So they said to me, they said, the Depression, what Depression? We didn't have anything before, we didn't have anything during, and we didn't have anything after.
Right.
However, some of them did lose their money in banks, where the banks would fail. And as a matter of fact, this lady I don't have a picture of them on here right now, but the wife of the guy I was talking to said that her mother had taken all their savings out, which is like $1,200, it was a lot of money, out of the bank. And the guy tried to talk her out of doing it, and the bank failed the next day. So, very interesting on that. This lady right here, her father was in LA working and heard that, oh, by the way, this is a lady I met walking along the street. She was in a red dress. I said, how old are you? Blah, blah, blah. And anyway, he heard that they were selling land for $10 an acre there after they built the dam out there in Arizona that made the land arable. And so he went out and got money together and bought 10 acres. And they started, and then they came from LA, Thelma and her mother and her sister Labuella came across literally on a flat car through the desert. You can imagine how hot that would have been, come across, and to join their father. They started a small farm, everything was going well. He started borrowing more money, getting more land, had a lot of land, and then he died. And then it was her mother and the two girls, and they had a farmhand. And then the banks foreclosed on it, and they're all back to 10 acres again. Her mother died, and she was taking care of her sister. And she ended up getting a WPA job, which was working as in a high school, in a library in the high school. And she ended up taking care of La Abuela when she was a teenager. Everyone died. This is the story, one of the stores. She gave me this picture. That's the store she worked at there, buck a day at the Lesser Farm. And she had become, when I talked to her, the grand old dame of Scottsdale. I mean, she was telling me, hey, they used to drag cattle along the street. And if you've been to Arizona, it's like freeway, freeway, freeway.
You name them cars, can you?
No.
What's that, a Hudson on the left? Chrysler in the middle? Probably that coupe is a Plymouth or something? Can't really tell.
Well, it's interesting because my dad and I, in the 1950s, used to sit on our stoop in Bellevue, Kentucky before we moved out to the farm.
Yeah.
And that's what we do, was name every car that went by.
Oh, yeah,
You know.
you could,
But
they were all different.
those are a little bit before my time.
Yeah, there's a Hudson and
But,
Chrysler, and I don't know what that other one is, Plymouth or Chevy or something.
Well, I'm going to talk a minute about a Hupmobile.
Oh, yeah.
This guy's a real character. Do I have time to continue on here? What time yet?
It's 7, but we can keep going if everyone's still interested. so.
Okay, well, I'm interested.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyway, this guy grew up in Indiana on a farm. They lost the farm. He heard that a lineman for the AT&T got killed. So he immediately got on his bike and went over there and said, "You need somebody?" And he got a job as a lineman. And that lasted about 4 years until he got laid off. He hitchhiked to Florida, got great hobo stories, him coming back on the trains with the hobos, how you knew where to go in town to get the food. But his older sister had a job as a teacher. And she loaned him money to go to an embalming school in Cincinnati, Ohio. When he finished that, he had a job waiting for him in Buffalo, New York. So he went up to Buffalo, New York. Didn't have any cold weather clothes, and it was Buffalo, snowing like hell. Walked through, like he said, a foot of snow over without an overcoat. Get to where the funeral home is, and the guy says to him, "Get in here, put on that lab coat. We got a funeral at 8 in the morning." Anyway, it was a Catholic funeral home. I said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, they were Catholic funeral homes and Protestant funeral homes."
Never heard of it.
And they were in New York at the time. And you were Catholic, you didn't, and vice versa. Anyway, he said, he even told me he said, "You know how you embalm a nun?" I said, "What?" He said, "Well, the Mother Superior sends over 2 of the junior nuns to watch you, to make sure you don't touch her." And he said, no, I'm serious. He said, these young girls, they're always young girls, they're horrified about this whole thing. He said, and he laughed and said, all those nuns went into the grave with dirty underwear. Anyway, he had great story. He met his wife. One of his buddies was at a dance, and they brought some other girl home, and they saw the light on in the funeral home. So she met him while he's over embalming the body. Real romantic. Anyway, I'll move on here. Each of these stories could tell you a lot more, but this guy is fascinating. He was born in California, and his mother died of childbirth. Dad didn't want him. So he got picked up by one of his aunts, and he got shuttled from aunt to aunt to aunt. There's a quote he gave me in the back of the book. He said, "I guess one more mouth was too many to feed." Because the ants would move from one aunt to another aunt. He ended up with his grandfather, who he did not get along with at all, in Spokane, Washington. So he hopped a train. Like, I lived on the railroad tracks down in Kentucky, and that's really one of the popular sports, was when the trains would go slow through town, you jump on the handrails, and right at the end of town, jump off. High risk. Anyway, he did. He ended up in Wenatchee. Washington. And so he got off, and he went in, he got a job sweeping the floors in a whorehouse, 15 years old. But he had a room there he could stay in. He said, none of them ever gave me a freebie. And so, anyway, but one of the girls said to him, this is no place for a 15-year-old boy. He said, well, I don't have any choice. I don't have any parents. He said, well, put an ad in the paper. So he did. And a couple answered it and adopted him. And that they had the Hupmobile dealership, which was the type of car began in 1912, I think, or early 1900s. And I was up in Greenville selling books up there at the fly-in. And I was telling this lady about the Hupmobile, and she says, we got one. I said, what?
Yeah.
And she shows me a
Rare.
video on her phone of
Yeah.
her and her husband riding around in a 1912 Hupmobile. And I said, well, there's also a story in there about an airplane. She says, stop. I'll bet it was a Curtiss Wright pusher. I just about fell over. I said, it is. She says, we got one. And shows it, they had 5 airplanes. Show me the picture of this. But anyway, what are the odds? Greenville, man. Anyway, Arden was a cattle farm. That's where he told me about the dairy farm, about the milk and everything. And ended up actually helping them. They didn't have any children, but as soon as they adopted someone, of course, she got pregnant. And so he had a younger brother, and he helped take care of the younger brother. He loved the family. That's what his parents were. So he ended up in the war spending 4 winters in the Aleutians.
Wow.
If you can imagine that. 4 winters in the Aleutians.
We had a neighbor when I was a kid that had a Hupmobile.
Really?
Parked in the street.
How many darn?
And that was in the late 40s.
Really?
And it was the only one I ever saw, ever remember.
Well, they went out of business in the 30s.
Yeah,
But
I remember that thing.
Yeah.
It was a big tank. It was an ugly car. Just like a bathtub.
yeah.
turtle.
Well, they went out of business because they couldn't sell it.
Yeah.
Anyway, this guy here, I think it's close to the end. Met him up in Seattle, walking along the street also. And interesting guy. His mother was a school teacher, so they did okay. He ended up joining the Marine Corps Reserves, and while he was at the University of Washington, went down to Pensacola, drove across the country with his mom to Pensacola, Florida for flight training. Saw, actually going through Oklahoma, actually literally saw an oil gusher come up when they were drilling out there. Pensacola was doing great, but until the final check flight, the guy failed him, and it's a long story. I tell in the book why. Happened to be the best thing that ever happened to him, because he came back to Washington, had his degree from the University of Washington, whenever popping rivets over at Boeing, he had a job over there, but also flying. That's where he ended up with the airplane. I got the picture in the book. It's the best thing that ever happened to him, because every one of his Marine classmates flying these PBYs, float planes, out of Alaska, died. Not through enemy action, flying into the side of mountains up there in the terrible bad weather that they have up there. So he said, that's why I'm allowed to. He ended up being a test pilot down in one of the aircraft companies in LA. That's the pusher. That's what that blade. It's called a pusher because the blade, notice, is behind the cockpit. That's where the blade is. He told me some people forgot it and they'd walk into it and get killed. This is the final group. It's the girls. That's what my mom always called them. These are nursing students that were with my mom in the 30s. Each one of these ladies, Ida Lee, that's Ida Lee Wrights, Mary Munster, Bessie Bussy was her name, and Ophelia Bay. They're all classmates of my mom, and they all formed a club that was after they graduated, and no men allowed. And I'm talking infants allowed. If you're a male, when they had their meeting, they wanted to be able to talk by themselves. So my dad would take me, and we had to leave. But really loyal to each other. None of them had any money. And they all ended up, I would say, middle class or higher. The lady on the right, Ophelia, her husband was a guy named Dr. Bay. She called her husband Dr. Bay. I mean, different world now. But the stories in there about how it wasn't nursing school, it's called nursing training.
Oh.
Very interesting about what they did with drugs and stuff like that, just carry them in their pockets, stuff like that at the time. that's it for those. I want to talk a little bit about that's my mom on the lower, Clarice Hogan on the lower, right. It was a hospital nursing school. These are some of the quotes that I think are interesting that I thought.
That's right.
The one in the middle is one more South means apparently one too many. I like the one, I couldn't get a job, so I got married instead.
Second one's hanging on my kitchen wall.
There it is. Well, you may have heard clean up what's on your plate. I heard that ad nauseum growing up. And you also remember. There's one here that, there was a story I didn't talk about a lady in Ohio. It was the one that was the daughter of the judge. That he ended up dying, they'd lost everything. And she had an older brother who was a postmaster, but as soon as the change from Republican to Democrat, he lost his job. They were all patronage jobs. I almost cry every time I think about this. She was walking, carrying her baby. She was also divorced, married a loser. She was carrying her baby, walking around the State House in Columbus, Ohio, in her words, trying to screw up enough courage to go in and beg for a job. And I just have that sort of emblazoned in my mind, pretty much summarizing that whole era. She did go in, and she did get a job, but when the administration changed, she lost that job. But she met someone that got her a job cleaning rooms in the big hotel in town. But at that time, if you were working in a hotel, you had to go in the back door. And very interesting stories like that. A few common themes. And one, everyone remember their first car. Children all work. I mean, everyone had taught you that, but they all had to give money to their parents. And as you can see, for entertainment, they basically entertain themselves. A lot of parties, neighborhood parties, picnics, things like that. Then you got the movies. You really could hardly afford it. So I say, that's what I began with to try to scare you. Interesting parallels. Pandemic, stock market, political turmoils, the weather extremes. Don't talk to these people about climate change. Please, don't even go there. And the final thing, if you listen to the chairman of our Federal Reserve right now, getting all sorts of assurances, this is no recession. Well, they were doing the same thing back then. So you can't believe these people. Okay, can't believe them at all. Anyway, that's my question. You think you can handle it? I'm worried only because I don't think people will pull together now like they did during the 30s. There was this common element of helping each other. Might happen up here in Maine in these relatively close-knit communities up here. But I come from the D.C. area, down there during the winter. And they're robbing each other down there in my neighborhood right now.
Yeah.
Much less if things get tough. So I mean, if you leave your car unlocked, it will be cleaned out that night, sort of thing. So I like I said, I don't want to end on a downer, but anyway. So that's my book, and if you want one, I can sign it for you tonight. It's on Amazon. Also, I got the sort of titillating book, Hurting to the Edge there. Any questions or comments? So
Well,
I know John's here, only gets paid
I
for
have
7.
a couple of books my dad had about Depression times
Oh, yeah?
that I picked up after they passed away. And there's one particular picture that I've seen, and it's been on TV or places where they talked about depression like you're doing.
Yeah.
And there's this woman with her kids, and you've probably seen her,
Oh, yeah, that's very famous.
with her hand up here to her mouth, just, what am I gonna do now? You've seen it.
That's it, it's very famous. I can't remember
I
the
don't know who
artist's
she
name.
was, nothing about it.
What the lady, it's a
Oh.
very
Oh,
famous,
Stevie Lang.
Dorothea Lange, right? Yeah, Dorothea
Is that
Lange,
who?
Yeah. Yeah, that's who it is. That's very, she had
But
very famous photographs from that. Very-
I've talked to people that lived in that time when they had these old cars in the
Right.
20s, and these guys on the farm didn't have a truck, or they had a pig they wanted butchered. They'd take the back seat out, or maybe
Oh,
they
yeah.
wouldn't. Throw it right in the car, that was their truck, and
Well, one guy told me exactly that story about how they began with a Model T. And it went through several different iterations
Oh,
in terms
yeah.
of what it was being used for.
built
Any
a-
other thoughts or comments or anything else?
Very interesting.
Well, thank you guys very much for coming. enjoyed talking to this group. Thank you for
Yeah.
hosting this. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Ed.
it. Yeah,
We all-
appreciate it.
Really enjoyed it.
As I
so-
say, I have a teacher's voice. If you want a book, come on up and I'll sign it for you.